want to cover a couple of basic rules. Number one, if you could be so kind as to mute your phones, that means don't put us on hold because we don't want to hear music in the background, but mute it. Number two, it's an interactive discussion, and Paul's going to be happy to address questions during and after the presentation. Use the chat box to ask Paul a question directly, if you would, please. Number three, the recorded version of this webinar will be available from RIC later this week. And this is the second in a recent series of webinars that we've conducted. The previous one just prior to this was on our new ANSI standard, which was a tremendous success. And I'm going to introduce Mr. Adamson. Paul is the chairman of the Marketing and Membership Committee of the RIC. He's the CRO of America's Remanufacturing Company. And I asked him how to introduce himself, and he said, hey, he's the only bilingual bard of the returns management. And I said I didn't know what bard meant, so all kidding aside, I looked it up in Wikipedia and found out that bard was a professional storyteller, verse maker, and music composer employed by a patron to commemorate one or more of the patron's ancestors and to praise the patron's own activities. So without further ado, I give you Mr. Paul Adamson, the bard of return management.
Oh, thank you, Bill. I love the fact that when I'm tongue in cheek and emailing the chair Rick, he takes it the whole distance. So hopefully everybody can hear me well. If you can't, feel free to send a little chat message, and I can make some guide. But with that warm opening, I better be able to tell some good stories as we go through here today. Really, the overview today, and you probably saw it in part of our publications and marketing for the event, is really to talk about the fact that returns management is an expensive part of the overall supply chain. Typically, about 10% of corporate revenues are spent on returns management in general. And the 2015 report from the National Retailer Federation found that at a retail level, retail returns are about 8% of the overall sales, and that's at brick and mortar. And recent indicators show that as much as 30% for online is the new norm. And obviously, we've all watched as the transition from brick and mortar to online has happened. So the overall need for best practices in returns management is even stronger today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. So why do we want to focus management? We're going to talk about the key components of it today. And really what we're going to really focus on is how do we move along that maturity curve as it relates to returns. And the reason we do it is so we can positively impact the customer experience, which then drives repeat purchase, and it overall enhances a firm's brand. And we're going to talk about that in terms of that circular economy. So this is going to be relatively high level. I expect that there will be some questions. And as you come up with a question, feel free to throw it in the chat box, and we can cover that in real time. With no further ado, we'll step into the presentation. A little bit about me. Obviously, to give me that warm opening, I've been happy to be part of the RIC now for coming up on 3 years. I recently joined one of the member companies, actually, of the RIC, a company called America's Remanufacturing Company. I'm not going to make this into a commercial. I'll just simply say products that are a little different, right? We do a lot of consumer goods. Think vacuums, powered hand tools, microwave ovens, generators, outdoor power equipment, that type of stuff. When I counted up the time, I've been involved in this reverse supply chain for about 25 plus years now, just over 25. I started out back in the day selling refurbished and harvested service parts to DEC and Wang way back in the day, if those names mean stuff to you. I get to home office out of Austin, Texas, which is nice. I've been calling this area home since, for 8 years now. And as a little bit of a snapshot of my life, those are really the three things I love. I love my wife, I love my Westies, and we do enjoy some good wine. So let me kick off and let's look at what are the components of returns management. And again, this is really going to be a talk about how do we go from really that rookie stage to that all-star stage in returns management along that maturity curve. And we're going to focus on these key ingredients: strategy, labor management, secondary markets, the application of inventory management, the all-important consumer engagement, which is a very interesting part of returns management, and then finally metrics. So that's going to be our building blocks for the discussion today. So let's talk about strategy. So if you're familiar with Michael E. Porter, he's a pretty famous professor from Harvard. He said it really well. He said the essence of strategy is choosing to do. So when we look at these bullets related to why you want to develop a return strategy, we're going to also focus on what you don't want to do in your strategy. But why do you do one? Why do you have to have a separate strategy related to returns? Well, if you're going to be competitive in your marketplace, you got to understand how to impact your customers and your supply chain. You've got to be attentive to the needs of your customer. And you also have to stay true to your mission. What do you want to be? Do you want to be someone who handles returns, really is what it comes down to. So the three components of a for returns specifically is going to be based on your returns. It's not a one-size-fits-all. When we talk about aligning the return strategy to your overall company goals, cost obviously is always a factor. But the next thing we want to think about is control. It's really the control of your brand. And I want you to think about brand, Bose. Many of you may have their speakers in your home. They are, just diligent about management of their brand. So if there's a return anywhere in their network, it comes back and it is serviced by a Bose service center. And then the product is then resold through Bose stores that you've probably seen in malls where you can get refurbished product. So they've chosen to manage their brand, to control their brand, because it's important to them. The other, how do you want to align your return strategy to your consumer? Obviously, most people, probably the most famous company from early on was Zappos. Who else thought that you could sell shoes and make it so it was a real easy transaction for the consumer, one where the shopping experience came without any guilt or fear of being able to return a product, and it worked out stunningly. Obviously, we know the growth of Zappos and obviously the acquisition by Amazon later on. And lastly, if you're going to create a winning strategy, you've got to create the business case. If you don't have the business case to support the economics of the returns, obviously it'll fail. So like any good strategy, if you can whittle down to three main points, based on returns, align it to your company goals, and create the business case, it'll be a strong winning factor. We'll dive into what we call the secondary market strategies. And typically what you're answering in this is, am I focused on margin improvement? Do I need to milk as much value out of my returns as possible? Or am I focused on managing the brand itself? And again, all that should be answered during the strategy stage. But when you start to look at the advantages of creating secondary markets for your products, you can really look at these potential levers that you can pull to create new markets for your products. For example, if you're a geocentric brand, right? So you sell typically just in North America. You can use your returned goods that have gone through a manufacturing process to test new growth markets outside of your core market. You might be able to open up your brand to Central and South America, to the Caribbean, to parts of Europe by utilizing these returned goods. A very strong indicator of their acceptance in the market, because obviously you're going to build in good product condition, the warranty, so it's very favorable to the consumer. And then when they're ready and you're ready to enter that market full time, you've got an established base that knows your name. Now, global organizations, though, can offer into these other growth markets more competitively priced reman goods. So if it's a developing market where new products may not be able to be sold at the price points they want, return goods are a perfect avenue for them. When we dive through, if you're not willing to invest for the long term in your secondary market strategy, then you won't be successful. So when you move from strategy, now you're into also developing what your secondary market strategy is going to look like. recognize that there's going to be a building phase, then there will be a sustaining phase. And if you're not willing to get through that building phase to the sustaining phase, then it will obviously fail. And that's where partnering makes sense. If you want to think back, we talked about your core mission, staying true to your core mission as a company. You may not want to be in the resale or remanufacturing business. You are managing a brand at the end of the day. So what you want to do then is create a partnership with someone who can leverage their expertise to help you develop these markets. Really, at the end of the day, if you diversify not only the product markets, but you can also diversify across the types of warranties you can offer for that same product in the other markets. You can pull some levers related to margin attribution and the revenue goals, and it could end up being a fantastic strategy for you in that secondary market. So labor management. If you're running any type of return operation, you've already felt this pain. You recognize that it is expensive to not only manage a return back to a facility, but also to manage the labor costs associated with that return. It's been projected as high as about 70% of the cost for a production facility is related to labor for those goods. So how do you combat that? Well, typically it's about making sure your incentives are aligned to your actual benefits. And what does that mean? So for me, historically, what that means is you can do some essentially value-based labor, where there's a baseline for them to attain each day, and then there's a bonus program of that, right? So the incentive is aligned to the company benefits. You want to take the time, though, to invest in the employees, and what you're really doing is you're looking at cross-training to solve that balancing act. Typically, when you're in high season of returns, what gets loaded up is your receiving docks. You deluge, you go from 2 trucks a day of inbound to suddenly 5 trucks a day because it's now January 16th and all the post-holiday returns are coming back. There's obviously different seasonalities based on the story, but everyone has a seasonality of returns. What you want to be able to do is shift your staff and your labor to be able to manage dock level receipts, core storage, and then all throughout the production phase as well. So if you can get cross-functional team members involved early in the process, and that's trained and ready to go during the slower or steady state times, during the peak seasons, they'll be ready to perform. The other piece of labor management that has been critical and oftentimes very difficult for companies to go and manage is demonstrating executive buy-in and commitment to the way they want to go and address the needs of the business. And typically you want to look at 2 ways to get executive buy-in and to demonstrate executive buy-in. First is you need to include the executives early in the process. Basically during the needs assessment, as you've laid out what your strategy is going to be, they should be involved. As you're defining what that future state is going to look like, they need to be involved. And then when you go to actually design the process, some subset of that executive team needs to be included. And what that allows is for this clear connection between not only labor, engineering, customer care, finance, etc., but also a clear connection between production and the executive team. That the strategies around returns are as equally important to the overall goals of the business as they are to the people who are working in that product every day. I pause and take a drink of water and see if there's any questions real quick. And we'll make a quick note. A couple of you have your cameras, and you've been good about putting your finger over the camera, but there is a function to turn that piece off if you're looking for it. So I'd let you know. All right, let's take a look. Let's move on here. Inventory management. Probably one of the biggest challenges when you're looking to mature your returns management Mostly because there is a never-ending balance between level of service and the amount of inventory you have to hold. And so planning for returns can be a key driver of your bottom line performance. And what does that look like, right? So typically, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on um, your inventory turns. You're going to look at the amount of consumed working capital, but you're also going to need to really focus on what the existing inventory management parameters are and understand not only what the stocking levels are, but where the stock lives and how that's impacting your overall service to your customer. So the thing is, you can have happy customers and your desired service inventory levels, but it takes a fair bit of work. The best part is to find an appropriate technology. Now, there are tools that most folks have today to manage their normalized businesses, and they typically, an SAP or a JDA or an Oracle has a returns component to it, but it typically doesn't meet all the needs of the business. So during that that assessment phase, you have to also understand what the limitations are of your systems to support not only your forecasting for returns, but also your management of service parts, your service inventories, your core stocking, all of it to be able to drive better decision making as you go through the returns management process. Again, at the end of the day, if we're going to move from a rookie to an all-star using that baseball terminology for the maturity curve, it's important that you have technology to enable you to do that. And again, whether it's internal or external, that's for your business to decide. Typically, if you're going to focus on your core business and find a partner, they're going to have something in place to help support this. Consumer market engagement. Now, how many of you are aware that your customers are talking all the time, but you just may not be listening? And in this day and age, we are inundated with information feedback from consumers. There's a lot of noise, but when we think through the opportunities that exist because of the way we can engage with consumers today, it's actually almost as critical on the return side as it is on new product introduction when you're first launching products into the market. So I really look at social media as an indicator of your returns management maturity, and here's why. Here's two examples for you. So about a little over a year ago, I was on a flight, and I utilize this Boingo. I don't know how many of you might be familiar with that. I pay a monthly fee. It's Boingo. And Boingo was his name-o. And it allows me Wi-Fi access in a number of locations globally. When I logged on a flight, Boingo came up saying that I could use my account to log on flights. And I thought, I'm bypassing, I don't know if it was a United or American flight, their expensive service, and I get to utilize the service I already have. Only to find out after my flight, when I received a receipt, that I hadn't really understood what the landing page was trying to tell me, which was, yeah, I'm a Boingo customer, so I'm going to log in as a Boingo customer. I'm still paying a separate fee. What I did was I sent a tweet. I just tweeted out to Boingo about my experience, and within 15 minutes, I had a direct connection back from the CEO of Boingo, asked me to share more details experience. Now, I wasn't trying to return a product, right? This is a web-based experience, but I was disgruntled in some way, shape, or form. And the level of maturity that they demonstrated by being able to reach out that quickly, address my question, and kindly enough refunding that dollar amount, which at that point I didn't really care too much about. I was just concerned with sharing the experience part of maybe a way to make their message better so that other people wouldn't be confused, or to at least find out that I was dumber than everybody else, and that's why I was confused. I didn't know which way to go with it, but truthfully, it ended up being a wonderful experience. Now, take that a different direction. I had a a concern over a product that I bought from a leading air movement and air filtration company, and I tweeted to them about a design, not flaw, but change that I thought would be interesting. I received a response back within an hour asking for more details about why I found that in my environment I was working. So I was a customer who had already acquired a product. I wasn't at a point where I was going to return it, but I was at a point where I need to share a concern. And so when we have these type of good customer experience, we're driving engagement and loyalty. And the best time to get engaged with the customers during these troubling times, right? The difference between a good company and a great company is how they handle that return process. And so I want to challenge each of those who join the call to look at their own customer market engagement. How do they listen actively to the market to hear what customers are saying about their products to not only prevent a return, but to ensure that the return process meets the needs of the overall strategy of the business as they've outlined it in order to meet the needs of the consumer and also the cost profile for the company. So let's talk through metrics. Everybody loves a good KPI. Everybody loves a good metric. But we don't often stop to think about the three steps to really good metrics management. And what has become very prevalent on the return side of the business is that access to data is actually more important to many companies than the actual recovery of the product itself, i.e., the overall yield. They would rather get the data, in my experience, than worry about 1% more recovery, or 2, or whatever their threshold is. But access to data is key. So it's almost a currency in returns management these days. But if you understand the process of metrics management, when to introduce metrics, what's the right one for your business, and then also, of course, how do you make sure that they work for you and your team? The biggest piece is returns metrics are not the same as forward logistics, forward supply chain metrics. We have to think in terms of percent of returns that are remanded, resold, recycled, percent of the overall cost recovered. What was the total cost of ownership for that product? The original cost to return to the store, the reverse logistics costs themselves to get to the return center, cost to get it to the remanufacturing partner, the cost to remand, the cost to resell, the cost to recycle. All pieces roll up into that TCO. What is your average cost to even process a return? Those are key metrics related to returns specifically. And really the most important thing is what you measure today may not apply in the future. If you get to a steady state, you need to be able to evaluate your metrics on a yearly basis to make sure they're still important to your business. And that's where we're talking about metrics maturity. Metrics maturity really talks about the fact that metrics help create a maturity curve specific to returns. That if you tell an effective story to leadership, right, then what are you going to get? You're going to get more resources because you're demonstrating not only control but also knowledge and a clear more business on the return side. And what does leadership like to hear? What does the exec team like to hear? They like the results, but they also like the supporting documentation. So metrics gives you the science to go and share your piece of art. Without that science, it's just going to be a bunch of jumbled images. And so I encourage those that are on this journey from rookie to all-star on the maturity curve to really focus on the metrics that matter to their business, the metrics that are different in the world of returns, and how to put together metrics that are not only measurable, but should be measured. So it's a rather quick presentation, but let's recap, right? So we always have to start with our strategy, that there's a fair bit of cost involved in labor management when it comes to returns management specifically, very labor intensive. We're talking Think of it, the things on your dock from a return standpoint: messy boxes, dirty products, jumbled, products all put together, paperwork that doesn't match up. Not a win. Always a little difficult. Once you go through that process, though, of sorting that process, that product, storing that product, remaining that product, well, how do you go about creating new customers to sell that product to? How do you differentiate yourself in the marketplace for that good based on how you handled that return? There are trade-offs in inventory management between your service level to your customer and the cost of your inventory. So that's a balance that you'll have to understand, and utilization of tools in the market definitely can help you. And again, you can have a happy customer and your desired service inventory levels, but again, it's going to take work. Then we looked at consumer engagement. Probably one of the most readily available sources of data that you can have in the returns game is listening to what your consumers are already saying. The beauty is, and we all know this, a happy customer will typically tell one or two people. A disgruntled customer will tell 10. So in this age of social media, those disgruntled customers are telling 10 people near them and thousands around them. So be active listeners to that consumer segment. And then finally, metrics. The key message there is measure what matters. Business matters, so therefore your metrics have to matter as well. So you have to be able to demonstrate that the strategy that was laid out in the beginning and executed is supported by qualified metrics. And with that, we're on time for the first half of this. First 30 minutes is complete, and let's see if there's some questions that need to be raised. All right, so I've got one question here. They're asking for an example of the difference between a rookie and all-star when it comes that I referred to during the returns management maturity curve. So let's look at it pretty simply. If you are running a returns warehouse and your customer has to wait till your product hits your door, gets checked in through your system, and then the process moves to finance, and then finance can issue a credit, versus the new way, which is as soon as I drop that box off at Amazon, I've got my credit already hitting my account. That's a huge difference. So are you crediting at time of receipt, or are you crediting at essentially a time when it leaves your customer's hands? The other piece we want to think through is between, along those same lines, as an example, is when are you making disposition decisions in your process? There are simply products you're not going to want back. So there's not a one strategy that works for all returns. People disposition at a field level as well as at a dock level. So if you can, essentially destroy in field for certain product groups, there might be some auto scrap product that you don't need back into your return channel. That's a very mature process that allows for that. Another example, if you've got a very disparate organization managing returns, from a maturity standpoint, you're probably not far along the curve. If your business has recognized strategically the importance of returns, you probably have a named leader in place. And this is still a struggle for large organizations today. It's very few and far between you find a VP level related to reverse or returns. But it is critical. And what it demonstrates is a recognition that returns are core to the business and they're key to their strategy. See if there's another question. So let me read through this here. can you identify some key secondary markets that your business has been involved with? Okay. Um, so again, to talk through, the product groupings that we manage, we're not, a Caterpillar, John Deere, or in Bill Davies' case, furniture remanufacturer. So when markets may be a little different, we're typically constrained based on voltage and amperage, hertz of engines, right? Motors. When we look at opportunities, so for us, we define markets in advance with our customers of where they want to sell their product. So it's essentially an onboarding process, and then we go and create that roadmap to leverage those selling relationships. So for us, we're typically North and South America, Central America, Caribbean, and then some parts of Asia, typically. Again, all based on voltage, amperage, and hertz. So I don't know if that helps completely, but I hope it does. Any other questions? Type in here and see. One thing I touched on earlier in the inventory piece, and didn't necessarily spend a lot of time on it, was when we were talking about evaluating existing inventory management parameters. And obviously people understand safety stock and lead times and EOQ and MOQ. On the forward supply chain, postponement strategies are pretty well known, right? How do you, if you look at the game console world, they're a fantastic example of postponement strategies, for bundling, etc. You can apply some of those same concepts though on the return side, and be just take some strategy to get there. Let's see. So, question: do you know of a method to enhance the treatment of returns that can be directly shown as a bonus to the stakeholders? Do you know of a method to enhance the treatment of returns? So I'm going to take this and interpret it, I guess, my way. I apologize. So stakeholders obviously are driven by, I would say, a few different things, and it almost in some ways ties back to your consumer market engagement if you think about it. Stakeholders are either concerned about the meaning of the brand, right? I shop at an REI versus an Academy versus a Dick's for one reason or another, because I believe in either what they believe in from a sustainability standpoint, right? That can be a bonus to stakeholders. How sustainable is your returns operation? Meaning, are you vertically integrated? Does the product that comes in, is there a strict focus on remanufacturing, to the ANSI standard, and whatever cannot be remanufactured goes through a parts harvest process, and then the parts that are no longer needed actually goes through a sustainable and certified recycling process to grab out those key commodities, metals and plastics, etc. I think that's one way to be able to demonstrate to the stakeholders in returns and the value in a sustainable and mature return management process. The other piece, though, is I think if you are able to take a return and we touched on the remanufacturing piece, but if you are demonstrating to your stakeholders that there is a level of standardization to your process, and it is not only repeatable but certified in some way. Again, I'll make reference to the ANSI standard, which is the first of its kind to demonstrate a standardized process for remanufacturing, which when it becomes an ISO standard, really set the stage, globally for the effectiveness of remanufactured products and the value to a consumer. So I think those things. I'm hoping this answers your question. I think those could be shown as a bonus to the stakeholders. So you got the appeal of the brand, the sustainability, you've got the repeatability and certification of the products that are coming out, which are then on both levels will help drive increased returns and reduced impact to the bottom line. Any other questions? What we'll do is we'll give it a count of 30 seconds, and if that doesn't get us a new question, then what we'll do is we'll let people have a few minutes back for their lunch that we might be stealing from. Okay. Well, I want to thank you for joining this webinar presentation today. I can turn back to Michelle for any of the cleanup items if they want to, or I can just simply say that we will send notification to any of those who registered when this will be available online for them to review again and share. We encourage you to share it with your colleagues. But if you have additional questions, my contact information is up on the screen. You're welcome to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to share any details I have and point you in the direction. One thing that we didn't specifically cover in this webinar that might be interesting to some on the phone is there's always the concern of the impact of selling reman product, whether or not it can impact your new product sales. And there's been a few studies, Georgia Institute of Technology, Georgia Tech, and a few others that have been published to talk about that specifically. We did get one last question, so I'll throw this up here in a second. But I'm happy to share some information on that if you have a question related to that. So we did get one last question. How about the engagement of the team member to treat the returns as important assets to maintain the value? That is a fantastic question, and here's why. So many of the products that I am indirectly talking about today, more on the consumer side, you have a return, at least at a brick and mortar location, where you have an 18 to 22-year-old who's just been tasked with taking the return back and getting it moved through as fast as possible. Really no concern necessarily for the condition or truly maintaining its integrity. It goes on to maybe a distribution center, then to a return center, then to a liquidation site or a reman partner, and all of that can slowly devalue the product. And so that actually speaks to the returns management maturity curve a bit more, is how do you coach up your staff at all levels to understand the intrinsic value of a return, not only the integrity of the unit itself, but also the lessons that can be learned by understanding why the return happened. Because truthfully, all returns happen at the point of sale, right? So when as soon as it's sold, there's a potential for a return. So I would say that's a great question. Engagement of team members goes back to your overall strategy. It talks to getting executive leadership buy-in, about communicating your message across the whole organization about why returns are important, not only to the brand, but also to the bottom line and to the environment. You've got to beat that drum on a regular basis. So that said, we won't let any other stragglers come in. I want to thank you again for joining today. And then Michelle, or Bill, I'll let you guys close this out.
I think we are all set. So as Paul said, we'll make the recording available. We'll send you out an email to let you know how to access it and encourage you to share it with others. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us or reach out to Paul. And thank you so much for attending.